Liria drifted through the bustling skyways of Xythra with the kind of grace that made her long ears sway almost like delicate silver ribbons, catching the ambient glow of the city's hovering neon signs. Above her, floating platforms hummed gently as they shifted position in an intricate choreography, and beneath her, hovercars zipped along invisible magnetic lanes, their thrumming engines vibrating the transparent floors of the elevated walkways. She moved with precision, a careful observer of every detail, from the flicker of a hollow advertisement for quantum synth fruits to the curious way a pair of street-cleaning drones tangled briefly in a fluorescent banner before untangling themselves with an almost comical squeak. Despite the spectacle, Lyria's mind was occupied with the same thought she always carried, a familiar, cool certainty that no alien suitor would ever see past her defenses. The countless proposals she had gracefully refused were stacked in her memory like unopened messages. Grandiose displays of holographic affection, elaborate challenges to prove worthiness, and the occasional absurd claim that one could tame a meteor shower to honor her beauty. She had answered each with polite firmness, even amusement at times, but her heart had never wavered. Independence, she believed, was more than a principle, it was a necessity. And yet, she allowed herself a brief smirk at the thought that even the most determined suitor might have underestimated the precision with which she evaded entanglement. The rhythm of her thoughts was interrupted when Kale appeared. He was human, awkwardly trying to navigate the hoverway system with a portable translator, blinking colorful error messages across his wristband. The first thing Liria noticed was how out of place he looked, like a vintage sculpture in a neon museum. His expression, a mixture of fascination and mild panic, as he narrowly avoided a collision with a delivery drone carrying a crate of glowing crystals. Then, as if guided by a peculiar gravitational quirk, he tripped over an anti-grav curb and flailed, arms windmilling in a desperate attempt to regain balance. The sheer audacity of the fall, and his subsequent embarrassed grin, made her suppress a laugh, which she did only barely, her chest vibrating with a sound that hadn't emerged in years. Kale looked up, saw her, and gave what could only be described as an awkwardly sincere wave. Hi, I mean hello," he stammered, his accent thick and distinctly foreign. He had the kind of earnestness humans carried when they meant no harm, but somehow managed to complicate everything anyway. Liria raised a single brow, the corner of her lips twitching into amusement. "You must be careful," she said, voice smooth, almost musical with a faint undertone of teasing. "The drones here are not known for their patience." "I'll try," Kale replied, brushing imaginary dust from his jacket, though he was already coated in the faint shimmer of the floating crystals. "I don't usually do flying cities. On Earth we mostly walk or run or trip over things, often trip." Liria tilted her head, her ears catching the subtle tones of his voice, something almost like laughter hiding behind every word. "You seem adaptable," she said. "Most humans I've met either panic or attempt to control everything around them." Kale grinned sheepishly. "I'm working on the adaptable part. The controlling part, well, we're working on that too, but slowly. Very slowly." Their initial conversation was awkward, yet charged with curiosity. As they walked, Liria found herself noticing the way Kale examined everything around him, eyes bright with wonder at floating advertisements, levitating fountains of luminescent liquid, and the small, singing robots that delivered messages in complex harmonics. Unlike most of her alien peers, he didn't pretend familiarity with the customs or flaunt knowledge of her society's traditions. He stumbled, asked questions, and somehow managed to charm with honesty. Liria caught herself laughing again when he attempted to greet a robotic barista by mimicking the ceremonial head tilt customary among her species, only to accidentally trigger a rapid espresso shot that sprayed across the counter. "That was an enthusiastic greeting," she said, voice warm with amusement as Kale wiped neon liquid from his jacket. "Yes," he replied, flustered but smiling. "Very enthusiastic, very. intentional. They moved on, their path taking them past a small alley where neon banners fluttered in artificial wind. Kale suddenly stopped and crouched to examine a tiny, floating creature with translucent wings and blinking luminescent eyes. "What is that?" he whispered almost reverently. "A messenger of the city's energy grid," Liria explained, though she added with a grin, "They are generally harmless. Though if they bite, they sing opera while you float in zero gravity for a few seconds." Kale laughed, a sound rich and unpracticed, startling a passing hovercat into a series of acrobatic flips. "I like your sense of humor," he said. "Not many take time to explain the opera-biting insects." As they continued through the glowing streets, Liria felt a strange shift within herself. She had navigated life carefully, always keeping emotional distance, always avoiding attachments that could compromise her independence. And yet, for reasons she could not name, Kale's presence didn't feel threatening. It felt curious, interesting, warm. The awkward human sincerity, the unpredictable energy he brought, seemed to slowly chip away at the walls she had so carefully maintained. By the time they reached the central platform overlooking the city's grand energy spire, a twisting tower that pulsed with waves of blue and violet light, Kale looked out, hands tucked in pockets, humming to himself. "It's beautiful," he said softly. "I've never seen anything like it on Earth, not even close." Liria studied him in silence, a small, private smile tugging at her lips. Perhaps, she thought, some proposals didn't arrive on the usual ceremonial waves. Perhaps, in the chaos of a human's missteps and laughter, there was a new kind of connection, one that didn't rely on tradition, nor on expectation. Perhaps, for the first time, the thought of courtship was not an annoyance but a possibility. And somewhere deep in her chest, a curious warmth unfurled, mingling with the city lights, the hum of hovering platforms, and the subtle, unspoken promise of something entirely unexpected. Liria had spent the morning guiding Kale through the labyrinthine corridors of the Xylar Research District, a place where glass tubes carried neon liquid messages like glowing bloodstreams, and automated drones chirped as they delivered tiny parcels of experimental materials. Kale moved through it all with a mixture of awe and mild terror, stepping over a hovering energy conduit only to trip over an invisible magnetic seam, sending him spinning into a bundle of floating papers that glimmered like frozen starlight. Lyria's long ears twitched as she caught his flailing, and for a brief moment the precision she prided herself on wavered under the amusement rising in her chest. "You're remarkably resilient," she said, voice smooth, with the faintest lilt of laughter. "Most visitors would have been vaporized by the thermal flux by now." Kale stood brushing imaginary dust from his jacket, his grin wide despite the chaos. "I'm a human," he said proudly. "We specialize in surviving improbable circumstances, mostly by luck, occasionally by sheer stubbornness." Their first task for the day involved a prototype energy device, a small cube that pulsed in vivid turquoise, designed to store and release localized gravity fields. The lab, a sleek chamber of transparent floors and softly humming machinery, was already crowded with a symphony of chirps, hums, and the occasional robotic snicker from a pair of mischievous maintenance bots. Liria explained the cube's functions with meticulous clarity, but Kale's attention wandered to a floating hollow panel projecting star maps of distant galaxies. "You really get around," he said, pointing to a series of twinkling lights marking habitable worlds. "Have you been to all these systems?" "I have observed them," Liria corrected, her tone precise but not unkind. "Traveling physically is inefficient for my current objectives. Observation is sufficient." Kale grinned. "Ah, yes. The old why travel when you can stalk the stars technique. Classic." Liria couldn't suppress a snort. Humans had a peculiar way of twisting language that made her laugh, a sound that was alien even to herself. "I do not stalk," she said, though she allowed the amusement to linger in her voice. "Details, details," Kale replied, waving a hand as he moved closer to the cube, inadvertently bumping a control panel that sent a faint shimmer of artificial gravity rippling across the room. Papers floated in slow arcs and the maintenance bots squeaked an alarm before diving through the floating chaos to set things right. Kale raised his hands in surrender. I meant no harm. Gravity is complicated. On Earth, it's simple. Down is down. Here, it's more like sideways with occasional surprises. Liria's smile widened and she shook her head. You are a hazard, she said, though the words lacked true reproach. And yet, strangely, I enjoy your company. They worked together to stabilize the cube, Liria's precise adjustments complemented by Kale's intuitive experimentation. While she had initially expected him to be clumsy and irrelevant, she found herself surprised by his ability to perceive subtle patterns others might miss. His methods were unconventional, touching panels in ways that seemed random, muttering observations aloud. But time and again, he achieved results that even she had not predicted. During a short break, Kale examined a small container holding a miniature earth plant she had brought as a gift for him. It glowed faintly under Xythra's artificial light, leaves shimmering in shades he described as kind of like a neon forest after midnight. I like it, he said, holding it carefully. It's resilient, reminds me a little of humans, small, unassuming, but stubborn enough to survive anything. Liria watched him, ears gently twitching, and felt a curious flutter of warmth. His earnest admiration for something so small reflected his broader approach to life, finding value in unexpected places, appreciating details she might have overlooked, and treating the world with a gentle curiosity. It was unlike any attention she had received from her own species, where admiration was often laced with obligation or expectation. Their laughter punctuated the day, as Kale accidentally triggered a minor anti-gravity fluctuation while attempting to reach a floating hollow panel. Papers, tools, and even a small robotic cat spiraled upward, twisting and tumbling before they floated harmlessly back down. See, he said, balancing on one foot mid-spin. Physics can be fun and occasionally terrifying. You are reckless, Liria said, though her lips curved in amusement, and chaotic, and yet, I admit, your methods achieve results. As the day progressed, Kale's presence became a constant source of unexpected warmth. They shared quiet moments studying distant stars through the lab's observatory, Liria teaching him subtle nuances of her language, musical tones humans rarely perceived. Kale stumbled over pronunciation, often replacing tonal patterns with wild improvisations that made her laugh uncontrollably. At one point, he attempted to mimic a melodic greeting of her species and accidentally summoned a minor holographic display of abstract patterns that danced across the lab walls like auroras. By evening, they found themselves standing on a platform overlooking Xythra's central energy spire. The tower pulsed in soft blues and violets, a rhythm that seemed almost alive. Kale leaned on the railing, eyes wide. It's breathtaking. I can't imagine seeing this without you here to explain it. Liria felt her chest tighten with a warmth she had never anticipated. His humor, clumsiness, and curiosity had woven themselves into the rhythm of her day, unraveling her carefully constructed walls. She realized, with a mixture of wonder and trepidation, that she was no longer merely observing him or his world. She was invested, curious in ways she hadn't allowed herself to be for centuries. As night fell, the city lights reflecting across the transparent floor, Kale tripped over the edge of the platform's railing while gesturing excitedly about the energy spire, catching himself just in time. Liria's laughter rang out, genuine and unrestrained, filling the space between them. For the first time, she wondered if courtship might not be a burden, but a journey she could enjoy. And perhaps, she thought with a faint smile, the human beside her might be the first companion capable of guiding her through it, unpredictable, humorous, and utterly alive. The morning air in Xythra vibrated with low hums as energy currents shifted across the city's floating platforms. Liria stood at the edge of her family's ceremonial hall, her long ears flicking at every sound: the hum of the hovering gates, the distant chatter of early traders, even the faint click of Kale's boots as he approached. Today, the council of her species would meet, a body of elders who upheld centuries of tradition, to determine whether a human could ever be considered a worthy companion. She had anticipated this moment with dread and careful planning, imagining lengthy debates, tedious arguments, and the cold scrutiny of centuries-old etiquette. What she hadn't anticipated was the warmth that settled in her chest every time Kale glanced at her, his human grin unshaken by the tension surrounding them. Kale fumbled with the ceremonial robes, accidentally knocking over a floating tray of hollow documents. Papers spiraled into the air like luminous birds, and one of the elder robots, designed to recite history in sing-song tones, let out a confused series of chirps. Liria suppressed a laugh, shaking her head. "You do realize those robes are meant to signify respect, not provide entertainment." "I thought the floating papers counted as a dramatic entrance," Kale said, catching a sheet midair. "Do I get extra points for style?" Despite the levity, the council awaited, seated on elevated platforms that glimmered with polished metal and softly humming grav chairs. Liria stepped forward, her posture poised, every movement measured, while Kale trailed behind, awkwardly straightening his robes and muttering under his breath. The elder's eyes, sharp and probing, swept over them like scanning beams, searching for weakness, impropriety, or humor out of place. Kale, oblivious, waved cheerfully. "You may present your argument," one elder intoned, voice resonant with authority. Kale took a deep breath, cleared his throat, and immediately tripped over the words of the ancient ceremonial greeting, transforming it into a half-stumble, half-dance that somehow drew laughter from the younger council members. Liria felt her shoulders loosen, a warmth spreading through her chest she hadn't expected to feel in the solemnity of the moment. "Esteemed council," Kale began, voice steady despite the earlier mishap, "I understand your traditions, your laws, and your concerns about cross-species partnerships. I'm not here to replace them or disregard them. I'm here because I see someone remarkable, a being whose courage, intelligence, and humor inspire me in ways I never thought possible." One elder leaned forward, long ears twitching in irritation. "And why should this human, a stranger from a distant world, be considered suitable?" Kale smiled, gesturing toward Liria. "Because she chose me. Not out of obligation, not because tradition demanded it, but because she trusted me with her world, her time, and her life. I'm not perfect. I trip over things, I spill drinks, I ask too many questions, but I care deeply and consistently about her. And I'm willing to face anything with her, because she makes me want to be better." A ripple passed through the council. Liria felt her chest tighten, not with fear but with clarity. The walls she had built over centuries, against suitors, against expectation, against herself, were no longer necessary. She stepped forward, ears brushing against the air as if reaching for something beyond the hall. "I choose him," she said simply, her voice steady, carrying both defiance and certainty. "Not because he is human, not because he is different, but because he is the one with whom I wish to share my life. With him I am not bound by expectation, I am free." A murmur traveled through the council, some gasping, others blinking in disbelief. Kale, clearly surprised, stumbled slightly in place, then caught himself, beaming with a mixture of pride and relief. One elder, an ancient being whose amber eyes had seen countless cycles of tradition, spoke finally, the tone softer than expected. "Perhaps it is not the species that determines suitability, but the courage to choose sincerely. You have both shown that." Relief washed over them both, and the hall seemed lighter, the hums gentler, as if the city itself approved of the choice. Kale reached for Liria's hand, brushing a thumb across the delicate curve of her long ear, eliciting a small, delighted chuckle. "You're amazing," he said quietly, almost to himself. "And you are reckless," Liria replied, eyes sparkling with mirth, "but remarkably human." The council stood aside, and the ceremony transformed into something entirely unexpected. A celebration blending tradition with improvisation. Floating lanterns carried tiny bursts of energy, illuminating the hall in colors that shifted and danced. Kale, as he often did, tripped over the ceremonial platform at one point, sending a cascade of floating ribbons into the air. Liria laughed freely, stepping around him, gently guiding him with a hand at his elbow. Their laughter mingled with the humming city outside, filling spaces that had once been heavy with obligation and decorum. As they exited the hall onto a platform overlooking the central energy spire, the city's pulse mirrored the rhythm of their own hearts. Kale leaned against the railing, hands tucked in pockets, looking out at the glowing horizon. "I can't believe this is real," he said softly. "I wasn't sure if I'd ever understand a world like yours, let alone be accepted here." Lyria's gaze followed his, ears flicking gently. "And yet here you are," she said. "Perhaps understanding is overrated. Perhaps living it and laughing through it matters more." They stood together, watching the city breathe light and motion, knowing that the future would be uncertain, challenging, and wonderfully unpredictable. But they had each other, and that was enough. Liria felt a depth of trust and warmth she had never thought possible, a proof that choosing openly, even against expectation, could create bonds stronger than tradition itself. Kale turned to her, eyes wide with a familiar, hopeful curiosity. "So, dinner?" he asked. "Somewhere